This week on The Inside Story. With the election just days away, the presidential candidates make their final case to voters. With control of the White House and both houses of Congress at stake. Now, on The Inside Story, closing arguments.
Hello and welcome to The Inside Story. I'm Katherine Gibson from Washington. Every 4 years, it comes down to this, as millions of Americans vote to choose the next president. In this final week, the two candidates held events designed to gain last-minute support and also lay out their competing visions for the country. VOA's senior national correspondent Carolyn Presutti has more.
In this final week, the presidential campaigns take on the air of a court case.
Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?
These are closing arguments, with voters acting as the jury until Tuesday. Former President Donald Trump making his case about the economy and immigration in Madison Square Garden, the epicenter of New York City.
Kamala Harris has shattered our middle class. After years of building up foreign nations, defending foreign borders, and protecting foreign lands, we are finally going to build up our country, defend our borders, and protect our citizens. It's called America First.
The 20,000-seat arena was packed. Some voters waited overnight to get in.
It will be kind of cool to have a role model, but honestly, I think Trump will do a really good job with the administration and with foreign affairs.
He's outspoken, he's unscripted, and he resonates with me.
I really see that Trump is going to take us to the next level.
For her rebuttal, Vice President Kamala Harris chose the ellipse in Washington with the backdrop of the White House, the future home for one of the presidential contenders.
It is time for a new generation of leadership in America.
Harris laid out her own vision for America, seeking to strike a contrast with Trump.
It is time to turn the page on the drama and the conflict. I will enact the first ever federal ban on price gouging on groceries. Cap the price of insulin and limit out-of-pocket prescription costs for all Americans.
Again, tens of thousands attended.
The first woman president, I would love to see that in my lifespan.
I am a gay man, and me personally, I like to keep my rights.
She says she supports abortion rights, pro-choice, a woman's right to choose, and I believe that she will ensure that there is not a national abortion ban enacted under her presidency.
Given how close the race is, the election may be too close to call on Tuesday night. And already there are lawsuits underway in some states over voter eligibility and vote counting. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News, outside the ellipse.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump and many of his supporters still falsely claim the 2020 election was stolen. And despite the lack of evidence, say the Democrats could try to rig the upcoming election in favor of Vice President Harris. Today, Democratic and Republican election officials in the swing state of Michigan are working together to ensure their citizens' votes are correct and secure. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Witteka-Swara brings us this story from Battleground, Michigan.
This was the scene in Detroit, Michigan on Election Day 2020. Supporters of Donald Trump, fueled by his baseless claims of election fraud, pressured officials to stop counting votes. Many Trump supporters in Michigan are worrying about fraud in the upcoming election.
Right now, our government, you got to question everything about it. I mean, I wish I could say differently, but that's not how America feels. We don't trust nobody.
One case is enough to question the whole system.
Allegations that the 2020 election was rigged have been repeatedly debunked in U.S. courts. But disinformation around election integrity has gained traction among Republicans. Polls show they are more likely to trust Trump over government-certified election results. Officials in battleground states are working to assure voters that the election process is secure. They say disinformation can be dangerous.
They can, in some cases, lead to people making threats to election officials or worse. But even if it doesn't result in any sort of physical violence, it does undermine trust long-term in the election system, which is bad for our republic and is bad for our democracy.
In many states, Republicans support efforts to assure voters that elections are secure, including Justin Roebuck, a Republican election official in Ottawa County, Michigan. He says it's an uphill battle.
Our political leaders at every level need to also seek facts and to seek data. And I think until that happens, we will have a problem, in terms of our confidence and trust in the process.
In Michigan, Trump loyalists have already sued Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, a Democrat, over absentee ballot processing guidelines and the voter registration list.
If Jocelyn Benson is not responding to what is required under the law, we will take her to court to get the courts to compel her to do that.
Benson dismissed it as a Republican campaign strategy.
In general, we see lawsuits masquerading as a legal strategy when they're really a PR strategy to get misinformation or sow seeds of doubt about our elections into the narrative.
Republicans and Democrats have launched election-related lawsuits in various battleground states, which could mean chaos in the November election.
Any kind of legal challenge happening this close to an election typically is lawyers putting a placeholder in case they may not win in a state or may not have an outcome they like. And it gives them the ability to challenge the election after the fact.
There are other potential disruptions, including efforts by county officials who support Trump to delay election certification. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Flint, Michigan.
We've told you in the past, it's not just the presidency and vice presidency on the ballot on November 5th. Every member of the House of Representatives and 34 Senate races are also being decided next week. Whichever political party controls the House of Representatives or the Senate will prove essential in enacting the new president's agenda.
Talk to voters and make sure they're voting all the way down the ballots.
Donna West, a longtime Democratic activist, does not just organize voters for Vice President Kamala Harris from her Las Vegas, Nevada garage. She says she is also fighting to make sure Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen keeps her U.S. Senate seat.
The more we can get out and talk to voters, the more confident I am that we'll restore Jackie to the Senate and take that majority.
Nevada is one of just a handful of U.S. states nationwide with competitive Senate races that will determine if Democrats or Republicans hold the majority. Democrats currently hold a slim majority with 51 seats. Rosen's challenger, Sam Brown, who was injured while serving in Afghanistan, says it is time for change in Washington.
We've got an economy to go square away. And look, there's things we can do from the housing to our energy policy. We've got to go after this border situation.
In Texas, traditionally a stronghold for Republicans, polls show a close race between Democrat Colin Allred and Republican Senator Ted Cruz. In their debate last week, Allred challenged Cruz on the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol.
This election is his accountability. You cannot just be patriotic when your side wins.
Cruz pushed back on that argument.
You don't hear him talking about the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots that burned cities across this country.
And in the rural state of Montana, Democratic Senator John Tester faces a challenge from Republican Tim Sheehy. At the Democratic National Convention earlier this year, a delegate said that many voters in the state may vote for former President and Republican candidate Donald Trump, but will keep a Democrat in the Senate.
Senator Tester has delivered for us in terms of the Farm Bill, and we are way too smart to let that go.
But at the Republican National Convention, delegates said Tester's liberal voting record is not right for the state.
Tim Sheehy is a real veteran. He is a combat hero. He is a Navy SEAL.
Control of the U.S. House of Representatives could also potentially flip, moving from Republican control to the Democrats. All 435 House seats are up for re-election this year.
The United States was founded on the promise of the separation of church and state. Today, however, some U.S. voters believe one religion should guide the nation's laws. We go back to Carolyn Presutti for more.
Two rallies, two different views.
Giving Jesus a standing ovation.
This is the Rally for Democracy, supporting all religions. This one is the Reawaken America tour.
Jesus is my savior. Donald Trump is my president.
Now in its third year, the tour supports Christian nationalism, the idea that the United States is a Christian country and should have laws reflecting that.
I will gladly be a Christian nationalist, because what can you say against Christianity? And they talked about, I'm following the God of love, following my life after Jesus, and I love my country. MAGA, make America great again. What is wrong with that?
Nothing, says Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump.
Together we're warriors in a righteous crusade to stop the arsonists, the atheists, globalists, and the Marxists, and that's what they are. And we will restore our republic as one nation under God with liberty and justice for all.
Our country was built on the Christian and Judeo values and principles. That's how they wrote the Constitution.
America's Constitution does not mention Christianity. Instead, it grants freedom of religion. The Declaration of Independence says rights are provided by a creator and mentions, quote, nature's God.
Father, we thank you for pastors of America.
Still, ministers at the Reawaken America tour take an oath to preach voting for godly candidates. Democrats say that's a violation of the constitutional separation between church and state.
The ministers out there really need to look and talk to their congregations about what it means to have liberty and justice for all.
Others at the Rally for Democracy agree, and some call for a debate on the teachings of Jesus.
What did he say? What did he do? Because this kind of message that wants to attack immigrants and will cause most suffering to the poor and vulnerable is literally a movement that is anti-Christ.
Add to that the abortion debate.
And let us all agree, one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling her what to do.
A Pew Research survey found nearly half of all Americans think the Bible should have an influence on U.S. laws. But the same survey found few think Christianity should be named the nation's official religion. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News.
Scattered across the country, approximately 14 million voters are members of labor unions. While this is a relatively small portion of the electorate, presidential candidates actively seek their endorsements. Now, recently, I traveled to Nevada, a state where unions could wield significant influence in this year's presidential election, to gain insight into how union members plan to vote.
At a rally for Vice President Kamala Harris, excitement among union workers for her plan to end taxes on tips or gratuities that workers receive.
I know that Vice President Kamala Harris has a plan, a clear plan to end federal taxes on tips for us service workers here in Nevada. That's right, that's right. And that Donald Trump pretending he is the tipped workers' savior is a dangerous lie.
Former President and Republican candidate Donald Trump has also visited this city that relies on the service industry to promote his plan of no taxes on tips for casino dealers, waitresses, and housekeepers.
That is going to be adored by the employees, by all of the employees, particularly that don't have salaries and that they work on tips. That's going to be loved by them.
Trump has also earned the support of the Las Vegas Police Department.
The majority of our citizens trust law enforcement. And so if law enforcement says, hey, we believe this person has our best interests at heart, that they're going to keep you safe, that they're going to try and make our economy thrive, that people trust what we say.
Gramas has spoken about Trump's support for law enforcement at numerous rallies.
A man like Donald Trump and his campaign has always stood by us and said, no, I'm not going to bend to the winds of politics.
The endorsement of the tens of thousands of union workers employed in Nevada is eagerly sought by presidential candidates. Vice President Harris also earned the endorsement of the local Teamsters Union, but the National Organization of Freight Drivers and Warehouse Workers declined to endorse either presidential candidate. Some voters here in Nevada see that as an important sign.
Well, they always went Democratic. So now if they're not doing Democratic, that means they must be leaning towards who? Trump.
But the Culinary Workers Union in Las Vegas did endorse Harris.
Working class voters are smart. They're not dumb, and they are a little skeptical. But the problem with President Trump is that he lies, and he lies a lot. However, Vice President Harris, this is part of an overall program to tackle the cost of living.
And they're knocking on doors to let voters know.
We're just canvassing for Kamala Harris. Okay. We're all voting for her.
Big corporations coming in and price gouging us on food, gas, rent. So having, the right candidate in office, telling them the correct information, what I know as facts, that, Kamala's going to be there for us, the middle class, the union members.
Union members here in Nevada, one of just a handful of swing states that decide the presidential election, could end up casting the deciding vote.
Another powerhouse group at the polls, first-time voters. These young Americans are ready to make their mark, with millions having turned 18 since 2020. They're known as Gen Z, and they're eager to dive into the voting process and play a role in shaping their future. Here's VOA's Laurel Bowman with more.
Thank you, our first mock voter, yay!
Student leaders at Montgomery College in Rockville, Maryland recently set up a mock polling booth with sample ballots and invited election officials to conduct voter education. It's an effort to get students ready to vote in the November U.S. presidential election.
Today's event was all about voter education and letting people see the polls, see what they were going to experience at the polls.
Participants like Akyan Demong seem appreciative.
I just want to see how it feels like voting for the first time, because this is my first time voting for the actual presidential election. I want to see what is the procedure.
These young voters care about a range of issues.
Financial issues with the debt of the country. I don't really understand much of it, but if I look at it, it looks like a big number. I don't understand why it's that high.
So I would say climate change is important, reproductive rights.
I think for many people, America's role in the world is a very important issue, particularly for young voters.
In the U.S. presidential race between Republican Donald Trump and Democrat Kamala Harris, most of the students we interviewed would not reveal who they'll be voting for. But the U.S. state of Maryland, a stronghold for Democrats, is expected to go for Harris. So we asked the head of the Georgia Young Republicans, Jacqueline Harn, what issues matter to her Republican peers. For many, she said, it's about the economy.
between housing, between inflation with grocery prices and gas prices ever increasing. It's unaffordable to live and have a family right now.
And how should campaigns go about reaching young voters?
You're not going to reach a Gen Z voter by doing a phone bank and phone calling them because they probably have a spam blocker on their phone, or they're just not going to answer a number they don't know. Because we're the social media generation. Everything that we looked at is on social media. We did our news from social media.
Democratic social media influencer Harry Sisson agrees.
And I'd say primarily, maybe the main news app for young people is probably TikTok. That's my main platform. And whatever reason that may be, I think it's mostly because it's digestible. A lot of these news segments that you see on TikTok are 30 to 60 seconds.
Meantime, in Herndon, Virginia, Kamala Harris supporter Camila Alfonso Mesa goes house to house, trying to encourage people to vote for her candidate. They don't always open the door, but she keeps at it.
Hi, definitely Harris supporters.
She says that Harris replacing President Joe Biden in the presidential race was invigorating for young Democrats.
I have seen a big shift in energy and enthusiasm since the vice president became the nominee.
Alfonso Mesa thinks the Gen Z voting bloc of over 40 million young people could make a real difference in the presidential election. Laurel Bowman, VOA News.
Now, we turn to our regular press freedom segment. With threats and attacks on journalists in the U.S. on the rise and the election now just days away, media associations look to train journalists on how to stay safe. Christina Casero-Smith and Liam Scott bring us the details.
In an office building in Rosslyn, Virginia, these journalists are preparing to cover the U.S. election. But their training is not in swing states or polling. It is focused instead on keeping safe physically, digitally, and emotionally. The workshops are part of an initiative by the International Women's Media Foundation, or IWMF. Trainers say the idea is to be prepared. They teach journalists how to avoid being a target, how to read a crowd at a protest, and how to keep their digital profiles secure.
The IWMF started the new Safety Across America initiative because we had the experience of the last election, and we knew that the incidents would continue in this election and probably potentially be even more severe.
Hostility directed at reporters during the January 6th insurrection and a rise in assaults on media drove the IWMF to take its workshop on the road. It has reached 600 journalists in 11 states. The training is timely. The U.S. Press Freedom Tracker is seeing a rise in assaults, arrests, and attacks on media in 2024, says managing editor Kirsten McCudden.
We've seen a large number of journalists assaulted this year, 68, nearly 70 journalists assaulted.
Earlier this year, the Press Freedom Tracker reported that the number of journalists detained has doubled in comparison to last year. These incidents have occurred while reporters are covering the Israel-Hamas protests in the United States.
But what we know is a tense time in the U.S. across all the cities. And it really, it harkens back a little bit to 2020, where we saw an unprecedented amount of journalists assaulted, more than 640, nearly 150 journalists arrested that year.
Those events prompted a more proactive approach by newsrooms in the U.S., where the common thread was that reporters needed to be ready.
This training is a wonderful opportunity for us as journalists to learn some of those tools and some of those intangibles we may not know or may need refreshers on as it pertains to this upcoming election season or the season that we're in.
And it is not just coverage of elections and protests that poses danger. The IWMF has found risks to media can appear anywhere.
Every beat in America has become a polarizing beat and therefore has become a dangerous beat.
With hostility to media on the rise, safety training workshops are one way to help keep journalists safe. With Liam Scott, Christina Caicedo-Smith, VOA News.
That's all for now. I'm Catherine Gibson in Washington. We'll see you next week for the Inside Story.